Okay, I imagine this is going to be a bit of a longer video because there's a lot of angles to this. And absolutely no planning here, it's just totally spontaneous. So I'm literally just talking as I think. I want to talk about the globalists as a concept, as an idea. This is something I've seen a lot on social media and debate forums and so on. And it tends to be promoted by people who feel very angry with the government, um, and such issues as Brexit, the Trump victory, and so on obviously come into this, and the rise of right wing parties across Europe and many other factors. Now, as a centrist, or rather someone who associates with the political centre, I find this perplexing because a lot of people talk about the globalist agenda, but not many actually specify what that is, what they mean by globalist. We live in an interconnected world insofar as digital technology now connects the world up in ways that it has never done before. Social media connects the world. Aviation obviously connects the world, although that's been, with us for a long time. And the nature of globalization itself means that no single country can go it completely alone without affecting other countries on some level regarding trade. Now, although I call myself a centrist, that doesn't mean I'm uncritical of politicians associated with the centre. Although it's not the sort of progressive, common sense centre that I would like to see. Nevertheless, they're towards the centre because they're not far left and they're not far right. Now, I've noticed people get really worked up with these terms, but animosity towards the perceived globalist agenda is for different reasons on both sides. So the hard right, the far right, whatever you want to call them, I'm going to say blood and soil nationalism because I think that's what it is. Their issue is concerns around immigration. Their issue is erosion of culture. Their issue is people being shackled from speaking their minds because of issues like political correctness and identity politics. Now, I understand a lot of those concerns, I really do. And no one can accuse me of being a shrinking violet on speaking out on those things. I believe I have. Look at my channel history and you'll see that. So that's that side. Then the hard left, the far left, again, these are debatable terms, but their issue is it's banking greed, it's crony capitalism, and so on. And that's incidentally why a lot of traditional socialists are very Eurosceptic. We often associate Brexit and Euroscepticism with the solid right, but actually there is a left wing side to that as well. And their issue is they see the EU as a big capitalist project. Now, of course, Brexiteers see the EU as something akin to the Soviet Union. I see both positions as exaggerated, although I do understand where the concerns are coming from. But the rise of nationalism should always be concerning to anyone who has any basic sense of history. The fact of the matter is, it was nationalism that led to two world wars. Of course, there were many other factors, but the fundamental driving force was nationalism. Um, and no, I don't buy into those conspiracy theories that the Rothschilds started both world wars. Bullshit. Um, I mean, the sort of conspiracy theories that go with that also say the Rothschilds own 500 trillion. That's their wealth. There's no question about it. The Rothschilds are an immensely wealthy and a very powerful family, no question about that. But there isn't 500 trillion in circulation. There isn't that much money in the world. So it is absolutely impossible for any family to own that much. A more realistic figure is probably around 300, 400 billion. It's still a staggering amount of money, although it's a big family, so that's spread out. I'm not saying that's okay, but it's not 300, 500 trillion. Now, the reason I mention that is because very often those who attack the globalists also get into conspiracy theories. A lot of them are anti-Semitic, but there's others, that one of them on the hard right is the white genocide conspiracy. This is something that's promoted by white nationalists, that immigration and political correctness and identity politics has a sinister plot to wipe out the white race. That's something that needs to be robustly challenged. I do think there are infuriating double standards. I mean, I get as angry as a lot of other people when I see, for example, black racists and Asian racists getting a free pass. I am consistent. I think racism is racism and it should be condemned. But unlike white nationalists, I don't endorse this idea there's some sort of white genocide. I mean, in this country, we have 66 million people, and the vast majority of people are still white. So, in order for a genocide to happen, you need to have a collective, organized attempt to wipe out an entire race or an entire culture. Now, that isn't happening. There is definitely incredibly frustrating things going on promoted by the regressive left, i.e., trying to shame, for example, British culture and trying to force diversity without looking at the problems of not having integration. Those are legitimate concerns, but here's my issue with those who push this argument of a globalist agenda. They have tunnel vision. If you don't agree with them, they they come out with conspiracy theories like you're part of it, like you're. I mean, they would say I'm some sort of Mossad agent. That's the sort of mentality that I see coming out of these people. Or if it's not that, then it's you know, you're basically they basically say that unless you, this is something I find incredibly galling and it pisses me right off, that unless you're either hard right or far left, then you don't believe in anything. And this is one of the main attacks against the centre. That if you're not hard right or far left or far right or hard left, like I say, there are contentious terms, and I personally don't throw them around casually. I have a very specific idea of what far right and far left is. Someone who's blatantly making excuses for Mao and Stalin, trying to argue that communism is a good thing, etc. That's far left. Someone who's promoting white nationalism, who is promoting blood and soil nationalism, is far right. And I know that triggers a lot of people on that side of the spectrum. But if you use the sort of narrative of neo nationalists, and if you come out with those sort of conspiracy theories, if you act and use the language of the far right, I'm going to call you far right. Likewise with the far left, and you could call me whatever you want, but that's, for all the talk of political correctness, actually, the hard right and the far right don't like being confronted. So actually, they can be snowflakes themselves in that sense. I try very, very hard to be consistent in my values. So, for example, I hate racism. Therefore, I'm against all forms of racism. Unlike the regressive left, I don't make excuses for black racists or Asian racists. If they're coming out with anti-white racism, I call them out and I say so. I have always been vocal against the incredible naivety of unlimited, unchecked immigration. I think Angela Merkel's approach to this was an absolute disaster. Um, I think that Western liberal democracies are far, far too placating to regressive cultures. So that's my position on all of those things. But Where I draw a line is the sort of people who endorse the likes of Alex Jones, the sort of mentality that goes with that. It's absolutely toxic, and Donald Trump has shamefully pandered to a lot of it. Now, what's happening now in Europe? There's a lot of discussion about this backlash against the EU because populist nationalist parties are on the rise. I think the EU definitely has a lot to answer for. The EU has been incredibly arrogant, and the likes of Jean Claude Juncker is the personification of why people have been against the EU. And I totally get that. You know, as someone who voted Remain, Jean Claude Juncker is the last person I would hold up as a kind of positive face of the EU. I think he demonstrates everything that's negative about the EU. But I don't think that in itself is enough of a reason to lurch to the ultra right and to blood and soil nationalism as a backlash against the EU, or even as being against political correctness and identity politics. I think you can be against those things without endorsing blood and soil nationalism. Blood and soil nationalism led to two world wars. That's a fact. And I know there were other factors. I'm not saying it was the only factor, but it absolutely was the driving force. And not just in Europe, in the Far East as well. So if you're saying that you are against the globalists, I ask you, what exactly do you mean? Are you saying you're against capitalism, in which case, by definition, you're a socialist? Okay. If you are a socialist and you're against the globalists because you say that it's all about banking greed, etc., etc., can you honestly point to any example of state socialism? I mean, that has been pure state socialism that has been successful. And no, I don't count Attlee's Britain because that was a socialist approach within a capitalist system. So I don't think it was pure socialism. I think the centre is definitely in a crisis point, but my deep frustration with centrists, and this is the point I would also come to, this is why I'm pretty disillusioned myself. You know, naturally, I look to centrists as a bulwark against the far left and the far right, but the centrists are not that moderate in terms of how they pander to identity politics. I mean, the Liberal Democrats, they're not as far left as Corbyn's Labour, but they have pandered to identity politics. I mean, the worst sort of identity politics have utterly failed to understand why people are disillusioned about mass immigration and so on. Nick Clegg touched on it, to be fair. He did touch on it during the election, but the party hasn't really they haven't really understood. They think that simply latching on to, for example, throwing people throw around the term racism and homophobia and Islamophobia and any other phobia, that latching on to the idea that you can just throw those terms around is a way forward. Or they think that the average member of the public, for example, and it isn't just Liberal Democrats, but they think that the average member of the public cares whether the people running the country are male dominated or women, or they think that the average member of the public really cares about box ticking. Most people don't. This is the point. Most people don't. And I think that's a very big mistake centrists make. They make themselves look out of touch. For what it's worth, I don't think that's entirely fair. I don't think it's fair to say that everyone who associates with the centre and every centrist politician is some, I don't know, latte sipping cosmopolitan elite who just wants the wonders of diversity. The problem is they haven't done anywhere near enough to dismantle that image. That's the problem with centrists, and that's why in this upcoming European election, I'll probably vote for Change UK, but I'm not doing so because I think they're a wonderful movement. I'm doing so because I am genuinely concerned about the rise of nationalist groups. Um, anyway, I'll leave it there, but And some people might come to this video and try to persuade me why I'm wrong, and they'll call me a globalist, and they'll say, "Oh, Nathan, you're a liberal X, Y, and Z. You're because they're very good at calling people names. For people who get so triggered at being called nationalists or being called far right, they themselves get very triggered. They like they have no problem calling other people names, and I can't make a video like this without talking about Brexit. The increasing the this thuggery that I'm seeing from hardcore Brexiteers, this notion that they can just issue death threats to total strangers, and that's okay, and they can hide behind, oh, it's the will of the people. So because the majority of people voted to leave, that gives you a right to send death threats to someone? What sort of mentality is that? Gina Miller was saying that she's been getting them every single day. I don't know. I'm very concerned about the way things are going, and I just don't know what the best approach is. I do think that I do understand the frustration Brexiteers feel, but they also need to understand that because they were on the winning side doesn't give them a green light to threaten people. And the same applies to hardcore Remainers. I'm consistent, but I am very concerned about the way things are going, and I just don't know what the future holds. But I am convinced that whilst we need to confront, okay, I'll call it the liberal establishment, whilst we need to confront their pandering to regressive ideology, whilst we need to confront this the infuriating double standards that we see, identity politics and so on, all the negative aspects of that, I really, really don't think that endorsing blood and soil nationalism, white genocide conspiracies, and all the rest of it is the answer.